Okay, so let's get started. I'm going to kick off talking a little bit about big picture economic development, and then we're going to cover tax abatement and then get into tax increment. So the first question just overall is, why do communities do economic development? And as many of you know, we're in a competitive world for jobs and business, and so most communities are in a position of trying to grow their tax base, grow jobs, grow income, diversify their economy, and all those are what we call basically economic development. But as you know, there's a lot of competition out there, and so many communities are put in a position to really, in a sense, compete for business and jobs. And so there's a number of almost every state in the United States, and actually many of the countries throughout the world, have incentives that they offer companies to locate into their community. And incentives are just one factor of many. You know that when a company is looking at locating somewhere, there's a lot of things that could be critical to where they go. Could be that they may need a lot of water, they may need a heavy use of sewer, they may need a lot of electricity. So all these things influence where companies go, or if you can retain your company. The level of employment and job training, having trained employees is a really critical issue right now. So all those things come together. What we're going to focus on today is more the incentive side of economic development. But so as I mentioned, all right, sorry, skip around here. One of the reasons why this is incredibly critical right now for Indiana communities is, as you know, and I know many of you are struggling with the impacts of some of the circuit breaker tax credits, which have basically frozen property taxes. And so what that's done is it's put people in a position of really having to try to deal with a shrinking pot of funds while expenses and things are still growing. And I'm probably preaching to the choir because a lot of you are dealing with these tight budgets in your counties. But that is even more of a reason why economic development is important, because, I mean, communities are trying to cut their costs as much as they can, but there's only so much you can cut costs. I mean, there's asphalt that's needed, there's all kinds of things that are essential, employees of the county, and essential services that have to be provided in communities. And so really the whole hope here is to attract companies, grow the property tax base of your local communities, so that as the pie grows, then there's less circuit breaker losses that all the taxing units are going to experience. So that's really the end goal of economic development. So as I sort of mentioned, why we offer these incentives are to encourage business investment, to increase our local and state tax base, to encourage job creation and retention, sometimes to target specific areas, geographic areas, specific types of businesses, and certain market segments, and then competition among alternative sites. Economic development can be a number of things, but we just have some photos here just to give you an idea of what types of things get included in this broad area of economic development. Could be alternative energy, industrial parks, office parks, large manufacturers, retail, office parks, and then a lot of folks focus on downtown redevelopment. And in fact, when TIF started, it actually started with the downtown redevelopment type projects and redevelopment areas that were established. And then later, the statute was brought in to include economic development type areas and projects. So a number of communities use tax increment in a larger area to help make improvements in their downtown and to help attract businesses to locate there, to help do improvements like parking garages and parking and amenities to help attract downtown relocation. There's a number of incentives that are available to local communities. Some of these are more accessible than others, and some actually require special legislation, so not all communities can access all of these various tools that are out there. Because we're going to focus specifically on tax abatement and tax increment, we're not going to go through all these during this presentation, but we just want you to be generally aware that there are some other tools out there that communities will use from time to time. Most things are they're targeted specifically to certain types of projects. And like I said, some communities you'd have to have food and beverage tax to use that. And then some things are not so practical for economic development, like general obligation bonds that could be issued, let's say, to fund roads. Those would require an overall property tax backup of the whole community, a property tax on the whole community. So a lot of times communities don't want to use a general obligation bond to do a project that's mainly targeted toward one area of their community or trying to attract one specific company. So it's not very often that you would see that type of a financing with an economic development type project. Okay, so we're going to, one of our incentives that we'll start with is tax abatement. And again, I think Scott's going to kick us off here. Heidi's going to explain a little bit of some of the detail. And as we'll cover some things, and then if you have questions, go ahead and ask them if they relate to the tax abatement, and then we'll follow that up, jumping into the tax increment financing. Scott?
Thank you. When a company or a developer comes to your community, they generally have their hand out. What can you do for them? Two of the things we're going to talk about is, we keep saying, are tax abatement and tax increment financing. I'm assuming most in the room know what tax abatement is, but let's go. Do you all use tax abatement? A group of auditors probably isn't real comfortable with tax abatement, but be that as it may, let's talk about it for a minute. What is it? It's a phasing in of property taxes over a span of 1 to 10 years, which reduces the company's tax liability on new improvements, new buildings and equipment. That which was not there before the developer arrived. And so what you're doing is you're postponing the obligation of a taxpayer to pay on the improvements that the taxpayer has put into place. Long term, it's a plus for the community. Short term, when you're looking at how we're going to pay for infrastructure and new buildings and one thing and another, it's, well, we're going to do it with taxes. Well, yeah, but we're not going to collect the taxes. Well, that's the tightrope you got to walk. The tax abatement law has been changed. The new law provides that there are more options. The conclusion you ought to get from this part of the presentation is when a developer comes and is insisting on tax abatement, you need to rely on your local economic development experts to try to fashion a program that builds in the options of 3-year abatement, 5-year abatement, what's it on, what is it your community needs that will accommodate the developer. As I said, the benefits are it reduces a company's operating expenses. It simply postpones the date on which the taxes take effect. It does not provide, Heidi, I'm not sure what you mean. It does not provide upfront capital incentive or fund infrastructure. It simply allows the company to get up and going before the impact of the taxes hit.
Yep. Yeah, we're going to go into more detail.
Taxes can be abated on new, non-retail, non-residential buildings. Taxes can also be abated on improvements to non-retail, non-residential existing buildings. A big addition, for example. On personal property, taxes can be abated on new manufacturing equipment, logistical distribution equipment, IT equipment, research and development equipment, and certain eligible vacant buildings. You cannot abate tax on land. or on existing improvements. Unfortunately, you can't abate taxes on liquor stores. Why we separate out liquor stores, I'm not sure, but don't try to abate the taxes on them. Facilities whose primary purpose are retail food and beverage service, automobile sales and service, and other retail can't be abated unless they're in an economic development target area or an economic revitalization area or redevelopment area, ERA. Cannot be abated on residential facilities unless, again, they're located in an ERA or in a residentially distressed area. There's a statutory definition for that. Or it's a facility for multifamily residents in a low-income set-aside. You can't abate the taxes on private or commercial golf courses, which comes as a great disappointment to my friend to the right here, who would very much like to pay less money to tee it up. Also, you cannot abate taxes on massage parlors, tennis clubs, skating facilities, racket sports facilities, hot tub facilities, suntan facilities, or racetracks.
Okay.
So if you have a developer who comes to your community to put in a large employment massage parlor, you're not going to be able to use tax abatement as a tool to get them there.
Okay.
Okay, moving right along into some of the details. Can everybody hear us in the back, by the way? Okay. Okay. This schedule is for your guys' reference purpose. This is what we call the traditional real property abatement schedules. So as you can see across the top and on the far left-hand side, this is the number of years of abatements and then in what year the abatement falls within. So you can see on the far right-hand side, these are the traditional abatement percentages for a 10-year property tax abatement. So this is more for reference purposes, just so you guys all have it. The next slide is for the personal property tax abatement, the traditional schedule again, and you can see that the 10-year personal property tax abatement deductions are different than the real property. So you should all be kind of aware of that. So when HEA 1007 was passed in 2011, there were a couple of new things that went into effect. One of those was what we call an alternative abatement schedule. And that is when the designating unit, which is the county council, city town council, can provide an alternative abatement schedule to what I just showed you, the traditional schedule. So they can actually offer up to 100% abatement annually, not to exceed 10-year period. And I'll go through an example here for one of our clients who decided to do an alternative abatement schedule and the reasons why they decided to do what they did. To have the alternative abatement schedule, there are certain suggested criteria that are necessary to determine those deductions. One of them is the value of the investment, that's the real and personal property, the number of new full-time jobs that will be created from that development that's going to receive the abatement, the ratio of average wage of the new employees to the state minimum wage, and then the infrastructure requirements for the investment. So there are, for them to have this alternative abatement schedule, there are several different things that have to be considered before they can even go down this path. And then the resolution that is put into place should specify the different percentages based on these criteria and how they weighed what they did.
I will say, though, it's my understanding that this is suggested. So from hearing from different legal folks, it's our understanding that this is their suggested, you may do this. So if somebody doesn't do this, I don't believe that would necessarily stop them from using the alternative schedule, but this is the recommended approach, that you would have criteria established and that you would look at these different categories, which would be very prudent, because if you're going to have different companies coming to you, you're going to want to be able to explain why you did one thing for one company, you know, et cetera. So you're going to want to have some rationale for why you would do this. Not you, but you and your county officials.
So the next slide is an example of what I was trying to explain. So basically, for this community, they decided on using this modified abatement schedule, alternative abatement schedule. And as you can see here, the first column here, this is the assessed value, assuming no new investment had taken place, so about 6.5 million. The next column is assuming that the investment occurs, but they receive no abatement. So you can see that it jumps up to 13.9 million in 2015 because there's no abatement assumed at all. The next column over is the 10-year traditional abatement deduction calculation, and you can see we put the traditional abatement deduction percentages there, so you can see kind of what happens. So in this case, their deduction actually at the 80% level went negative. And that's because they have their existing and new investment included in this calculation. So one thing that can happen is if there is existing existing investment that has abatement, and what? Equipment that has, if there's existing equipment that has been receiving an abatement and a new company, or they want to do an expansion and locate new equipment and get an additional abatement on top of that, because of the way the personal property abatement calculation works, and something that's called the minimum value ratio, which I'm not going to go into too much detail about, but because the existing equipment is like 30% floor, which is the minimum value it can be assessed at, when this new investment comes on, it is automatically taken sort of into that level. So it's almost double counting the abatement on the new investment. So you can see here that at the 80% level, it actually goes negative. So it's, in a sense, overstating the abatement that the new investment really should have received. So because of how the calculation works, this community decided to do this modified 10-year abatement structure here, and you can see the various percentages they used over a 10-year period. And they did that again so that there would be assessed value and taxes that they paid. And so in this instance, it worked best for this community to choose this method. So in summary, I would say the abatement calculation is very complicated, and it's my recommendation, obviously, to have somebody look at it if there's a company that's coming to locate that is requesting a new abatement and they already have an existing abatement. So I don't know if you want to expand.
The only thing I would add is that, so for a simple abatement on a new building or new equipment, it's simple. And there actually is a calculator on the Hoosier Energy website, if any of you ever want to run one or want to know that a company's looking at that as an option. They can plug in any number and the abatement will be run. We actually help them develop that. But as Heidi was mentioning, when you get a company that has existing equipment and is also doing the new equipment, that there's these complications that can occur. So at that point, it's very helpful to have someone actually get their existing equipment schedule, the abatement, and then add the new to it to see what that ultimate impact is. And when we show negative, basically what that means is that company wouldn't pay any taxes on their equipment at that year. Okay, and also, I think you're going to get into responsibilities, but one of the reasons we thought we wouldn't get into too much more detail than that is because our understanding is the assessors who actually the company makes the calculation, but the assessor then provides the deduction to you. So
Which we're going to get into more detail in just a second.
So you go ahead.
Moving along. One other thing that was unique with HEA 1007 was the enhanced abatement procedures, and this allows up to a 3-year 100% tax abatement on existing buildings. Again, they have criteria that they have to meet, and those are listed here below. It has to be a large vacant building over 50,000 square feet. It has to be used for industrial or commercial purposes, or it has to be an investment of at least $10 million of eligible property, which Scott had mentioned the eligible property before. Or it has to rehab or occupy property in a designated downtown area, or it has to be located within a county that has high employment, which is 2% above the state average. Some pros and cons on tax abatement. Tax abatement's used as an incentive to induce private investment in your communities. A con is that it does delay or phase in the property taxes over whatever the percentage it is. The 10-year property tax abatement options and schedules have been adequate for most projects, their traditional schedules. And the new flexibility can encourage certain types of investment to occur. When TIF and tax abatement are combined, the greater the abatement, the less TIF that's available to fund projects, because again, it's phased in over a certain period of time. It is slightly complicated to administer, as you guys can all attest, and it does increase the competition among your local communities as far as it being an incentive that you offer companies to get them to locate into your communities. Okay, now I'm going to go into the process in more detail. I'm going to first discuss the real property tax abatement. So the very first step you have to go through to get the real property abatement in place is you have to designate an area as an ERA, which is an economic development or an economic revitalization area. And it's the fiscal body of the unit, it's the county council or city town council that has to designate that ERA. After they do that, there's got to be a declaratory resolution, a public hearing, a notice of public hearing, and then the public hearing, and then a confirmatory resolution to set up that ERA. After that, the redevelopment commission, if it's within a TIF district, has to approve those abatements. After you designate the ERA, then the company has to complete the SB1 forms, which you guys are probably familiar with. On the SB1 forms, there's investment information that they have to fill out, estimated value, the abatement term that they are requesting, and then there's also jobs and salary information that they are required to put on those SB1 forms. The designated body on the second page of that form can actually add limitations to their abatement request. And this must be filed before any redevelopment starts or any equipment is installed within that facility.
I wanted to add, at that point, sometimes on those limitations that are added, some communities have written in clawbacks, I believe, or they've put it in a resolution form when they've granted the abatement. So if the company would leave, they would say a clawback, for example, might be that the company has to pay back any benefit of property tax abatement they received. So it's worth putting something in place sometimes for a large abatement. The problem is, like, if a company would go bankrupt or foreclosure, you probably aren't going to recover. You may not recover your clawback, but in other cases, there's been examples where a company took advantage of an abatement and then they left right at the end of their 10-year. And some communities have sought some kind of clawback, particularly under the new structure, where if somebody would give somebody 100% abatement for 10 years and then the company leaves, you've received no property taxes from that company for 10 years. So it would be important to think about putting in a clawback provision.
As far as the statement of benefits, the designating unit must approve the SB1 and make statutory findings of the benefits of that company receiving that abatement. So after they designate the ERA and the statement of benefits form is filed by the company, the deduction application comes into play. So the Form 322 RE must be filed one time for real property abatements just one time with the auditor's office before May 10th or within 30 days of the company receiving their Form 11s, which is the assessed value notification form, which you're all very, very aware of. If there is no Form 11 that was sent to the company, then the 322 is due 30 days within them receiving their tax bill.
So it's important to know, because some companies miss this step. They start out, they do the ERA, they bring their SB1, they get approval from the county officials in their meetings, and they think they're all set to go and receive their abatement. So it's important for that company to be aware that that they actually, when they get their increased assessment that's going to be subject to abatement, that they have to file this with the auditor, this form. So if you happen to know that that's occurred, that a company is going to receive an abatement, it's worth reaching out if you wish, or that comes up. Obviously, you're not obligated to do that. But we have, I'm sure some of you have had that situation where a company missed their filing and it causes a lot of headaches. In which case you can just say, sorry, you missed the filing. There are some places that will try to work with the company and get them on track for the following year.
I've also had a client who they went through the process of filing their SB1s and getting that all approved, but then they decided that they didn't actually want the abatement because they were being offered other incentives. So you just have to make sure that, again, that deduction application form is the kicker for them to actually receive that abatement. So, yeah. Sorry, I missed that. The next point is the annual compliance form. So the CF1 is what the company must show between March 1 and May 15th each year with the designated body and the auditor's office. If not compliant, then the abatement could be terminated, and it's your guys' job, I guess, or responsibility that you have the responsibility to approve, deny, or alter the amount of the deduction for real property abatements.
One thing just to keep in mind with compliance, in some communities they will evaluate. I know the Redevelopment Commission, for example, in Lafayette, they actually look at the abatements and make a recommendation as far as to keep the abatement going or not when they look at the compliance information. But it is important just to be aware that there are companies that, especially as you know, we just went through with the economy and the challenges that many companies have faced, that if a company is really trying and they're going through just tough economic times, you may, if they say they haven't quite met their job criteria that they put into their original application, I mean, it's worth considering that you don't necessarily want to take the abatement away, because that might really hurt them even more and even maybe put them out of business. So it's important to consider the circumstances when you're looking at compliance. If they're putting forth their best effort and it's just a function of the economy and the market, you may not want to pull their abatement away if they're really making their investment and they have employees. So it's just something to keep in mind. Yeah.
I just put some helpful links here, but all of the forms that I refer to are on the DLGF website at that link. And then another helpful presentation, it discusses more on the personal property, but some real property abatement is at this link. And it was a presentation that was done by the DLGF in August of this year. And it is very, very detailed and all of way more than what we just covered. So I would definitely use that as a resource. As far as what your responsibilities are with real property tax abatements, are maintaining the records of the real property tax abatements, and then making annual adjustments to the abatement, which I'm going to go into further detail here in a second as well. So I'm going to go over the personal property now. The personal property, designating the ERA and filing the SB1 personal property form are similar to how the real property abatements work. The deduction application, it's the form 103 long and the 103 ERA forms, and those forms are to be filed by the company to the assessor's office annually, just so you're all aware. So, and then as far as annual compliance there, again, there's a CF1, and then for personal property abatements, they have to do the 103 long and ERA forms every year, and the company fills that information out and files it with the assessor's office. And that must be filed between March 1 and May 15th. And then the assessor examines and verifies the accuracy of the 103 forms, and the assessor approves, denies, and alters the amount of the deductions for personal property abatements. Again, all the forms for personal property are located here. And then as far as your guys' responsibility for personal property abatements, is that you just apply the deduction amounts that you receive from the assessor's office into your systems for the parcels that have abatements. So I just had mentioned a few minutes ago what your responsibility is for the real property abatements and the annual abatement calculation adjustment that needs to be made. And I know these are questions that we ask when we come in and help with neutralizations in many communities, but for real property abatements on an annual basis, you guys are supposed to adjust the improvement amount that the abatement is being calculated off of because of trending. So as you know, most of the time every year that the values go up or down based on trending. So when that occurs, the amount that the abatement's being calculated off of should also adjust accordingly. So I've given you an example here. In 2013, say the abatement's being calculated off of $1 million of assessed value. It has 10 years of abatements, in its 50% year, in its fifth year, they receive a $500,000 deduction. Well, in 2014, the assessed value on that property actually has decreased, and the amount that the abatement is to be calculated off of is $800,000. So now you should be decreasing the assessed value of the abatements being calculated off of to the $800,000, and then taking the percentage times that reduced amount or increased amount if it goes up. So just something for you to all be aware of, that needs to be happening each year.
One of the questions somebody asked us ahead of time was about if you have multiple abatements. So, or you could have one abatement, say it was given on some building improvements, and say they estimated the building improvements would be $5 million, and the first year they only completed 50%. So it's possible that the abatement would, so say that first 50% of the building actually got assessed if they do partial assessments. So the abatement would actually start on that building, so that first piece at the 50% would be, you would apply your 100% abatement. Say it has a 10-year abatement, then 90%, 80%, and so forth. And then the next year, they finish the building, and now the assessment goes up 50% for that other half, let's say. So then you actually track that piece, and you start that one on its new abatement cycle, 100% abated that year, 90%, and so forth. So you actually could end up with two different pieces that are being tracked for that building or more. And then in some cases, say equipment, same thing, but it could be phased in maybe in 3 years or something. And so it can become complicated to keep track of. And then maybe some stuff, the land isn't subject to abatement. So you actually have to know which part of the assessed value is what's subject to abatement tied to those improvements, and then that gets tracked to each abatement schedule. And I'm not sure, I would imagine that there could be some variations with how the assessors communicate that with the auditor, but not sure. Has anybody had actually particular experience that they wanted to share about that?
I know a majority of computer systems now can track those multiple layers of abatements, is what I call them. We have almost every county here probably that I work with has one that has multiple abatements, one parcel that has multiple abatements. Pam?
Okay, I've got a small one and it's kind of funny, so that's what I got.
Good, comic relief.
We had a chicken processing plant, and they first came in with a plucking group of equipment. And so they were abated for plucking, and it gets better. Next one's beaking, you know. Each little part has its own little special equipment that gets to track plucking, beaking, and whatever separately, right, on their own schedule. Okay, my assessor's all on top of that then. So we've got our chickens pieces all right.
Yeah. Any other great stories? Anybody?
Can't beat that one.
No debeaking? Everybody want to stand up and do the chicken dance, maybe? Calissa, chicken dance? Go. Okay, any other questions on this annual adjustment that needs to be made? Okay. Oh, yes. Hold on, Calissa, sorry.
So each year on a real estate abatement, you need to check with your assessor on what that trended assessed value has changed to before you apply the abatement.
Right.
So, and then if you have a previous, well, sometimes you'll have a building and then have a new abatement on,
Mhm.
you would have to track all of the ages.
Yeah.
So that would just be communication between your assessor and yourself.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's what we highly recommend, a good system between the auditor's and assessor's office with the abatements discussion. Okay. Enough on abatements. We'll move along here to tax increment, and Lauren will take it from here for a little while.
Okay. So I know I throw out the acronym a lot. TIF stands for Tax Increment Financing. And basically the purpose of TIF is to finance incentives and infrastructure that are needed to induce private investment, to encourage orderly growth in targeted areas, and to redevelop blighted areas. I believe statute doesn't use the word blight anymore, but that's the concept. So one thing that's important just to understand the difference between tax abatement and TIF, although they can both be used, but generally, okay, what we've described is the tax abatement is a phasing in of taxes. There's times where maybe there's no taxes paid, and then gradually the company pays more taxes. With tax increment, the company is paying their taxes. If they don't have abatement, they're paying their full taxes. But whatever taxes they're paying, the difference is that those taxes aren't going into the general tax base. They're going to be put into a separate fund and used for economic development or redevelopment. So it's just important to realize with TIF, the company is paying taxes. They're just being used a certain way. Okay. So some of the pros and cons. Oops. What did I? Oh, sorry, folks. I missed a couple slides. No wonder you're looking at me with a funny face. No. So TIF, as I mentioned, okay, so we're capturing the assessed value from the new property taxes that are going to be on this new development in the area. And then the types, you can normally, in the area, you're going to capture the real property growth in this designated area. We're going to do a couple illustrations to help with the concept, but you're going to capture the real property that grows above the base for TIF. And for the equipment, it's only if it's a certain type of manufacturer or facility, the types listed up here, where it has to be specifically designated for that company. So there are many TIF areas that only the real property improvement increases are captured, not the equipment. And it's typically only for the types of TIF that are involving a specific company or a couple companies that have usually manufacturing type equipment, processing and so forth, that is actually designated to be captured. Okay. Okay, then that next slide is the one I already discussed, so we'll go to the next one. Sorry. All right, and the pros and cons, some of the benefits are that the TIF is used to finance incentives and infrastructure needed to induce that private development and encourage economic growth. It can be used to help encourage orderly growth. So instead of having hodgepodge growth, sometimes TIF can be used to help with getting growth in certain targeted areas of a community. It can be used to help redevelop those aging or deteriorating areas. Normally when TIF is used, there's no additional tax levy applied, so it's being paid from the incremental growth of those taxes. There's no referenda process normally, unless there's a property tax backup potentially, but normally not. It's extremely flexible, and that's probably one of the keys. TIF it gets a bad rap, and I know aside from the administering, I know many folks have been hearing complaints, and there's been some articles out there, and it's not that TIF is a perfect panacea as an incentive, but most of you are aware there are not a lot of other tools available for local governments to use to fund, to encourage growth, to fund roads, and to get things moving in terms of facilitating growth and to attract companies and to encourage companies to stay in their communities. So it's sort of by default that most communities around the state are using tax increment because it's a useful tool that they have the flexibility to use and to incentivize companies to locate there. And a lot of times, another benefit is that there will be sometimes there's property growth that's not captured. They may not capture all the TIF, or they may not be capturing the personal property. So there is oftentimes other property taxes that are flowing through a little bit along the way. There's surplus tax increment that can be used and so forth. The cost of TIF, the con, is that a community, the other taxing units are going to forego that increase in assessed value during the time of the TIF. So in a sense, all the taxing units share in the cost of getting that development to locate there or to grow there. So all the different units are not getting that assessed value in their tax base. When it's a pure but-for, we call the but-for situation, but for doing the TIF incentive, this company wouldn't grow or wouldn't locate there, the developer wouldn't do their development, then you can't really say that anything's lost, and the idea is that you're going to gain this growth into your tax base so that when the TIF ends, all this new assessed value will be in your tax base. But during that time, there is some cost in terms of not realizing the benefit of that growth to the whole tax base. The other thing with TIF is, we'll talk about a little bit when we get into the bond section, that there are some complexities with marketing bonds that make it a little more cumbersome to do that than a regular general obligation type, vanilla type bond issue. And then I'm just going to hit on one more slide is what TIF can be used for. As I mentioned, it's very flexible, so it can be used to fund utility improvements, water, sewer improvements, roads, infrastructure, land acquisition. It can even be used to help fund the building itself that a company would be building. And also TIF can be used to fund projects either through a bond issue where it's going to be used to repay the bonds, or it can be used on a pay-as-you-go basis, which means as the TIF comes in, it's used on specific projects each year.